Welcome back to In Light of the Gospel. This is episode 62. My name is Dan Blatz, and today I'll be speaking with Frank Dyke. Many of you might know him from the Men's Encounter Ministry. Him and I go way back. I've known him for many years. I met him when he was living in Niagara. We were involved in a similar church situation, and we really enjoy each other's company. And I was very blessed by the conversation. I was kind of energized by it, fired up a little bit about wanting to serve God better and continue to preach the gospel. In this podcast, we go into his life story, how he was born and raised, or where he was born and raised, and how he grew up, how he came to the faith, how he got into ministry and went out of ministry and now back into multiple ministries. I haven't seen him a number of years. He's moved to Alberta now, and he's doing a ministry now that he's called the Tabernacle ministry. He took it over from a gentleman named Bruce Woodford, who passed away a couple of years ago. And he's got a 2-scale tabernacle, and he does a presentation where he shows what the tabernacle would have looked like and what the tabernacle represents and how it points us to the Lord Jesus and his great work for us. So I appreciate you tuning into the channel and sharing these videos and liking them. It's a real pleasure for me. It's humbling to see so many people tuning in, but it's also a real blessing. So thanks again for tuning in, and God bless you. So this conversation's been a long time coming.
Yeah,
I've been trying for probably 2 years, I would say.
Yeah, at least that.
At least that.
Yeah.
You and I go way back. Your brother Isaac and I would go even a little bit further back.
Mm-hmm.
I got saved shortly after the old colony had a church split. Mr. Redekop started this thing. Isaac got saved somewhere in that time frame.
Mm-hmm.
And then him and I were asked to song lead.
Yeah.
And so him and I would get together every week and go over hymns and learn new songs and talk gospel. And I got saved somewhere in that process as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then a couple of years, kind of fast forward, that Isaac and I both left and went to a charity-style church at Vienna. And from there, all of a sudden we started hearing, hey, there's a stirring going on in Niagara.
Mm-hmm.
And then I remember the first time, I think I was one of the first times that anyone from Vienna came to Niagara. It was me and Benji. Maybe Isaac was there, I can't remember. But we were in your basement, and I shared a little 10, 15, 20-minute little devotional or something like that. And I had never really preached or taught or anything like that before. But so that was our first time meeting, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it was, yeah. Yeah, the interesting thing is before Isaac got involved within the Redekop movement, he was considered in our family like the black sheep of the family.
Always troublemaking.
Oh yeah, me and my brothers, we were all the good Christians, being involved at the church, and the one time we heard about this Redekop split.
Mm-hmm.
So me and my brother John, we had been trying to get Isaac, right with the old colony church for quite a while, and it was all failing. So finally we just sat down with him and said, well, maybe you should go to the Redekop church. Maybe they would have what you need.
Yeah.
And he did, and through all those steps, at some point he got saved, and then later on he would be the one to
trying to witness to you guys.
Then I would get saved through him. So I was.
He's a little younger.
No, he's older than I am.
He is older than you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So when he got born again, he was changed like night and day. Like he didn't just start going to church more faithfully. He was talking about Jesus like Jesus,
and from like a fighter, partier, drinker, smoker, like all that stuff, to like boom, carrying the Bible, telling people about Jesus. Like extreme.
Yeah, and not just a little Bible, a big one.
He became a Bible thumper, right?
Yeah.
To the point where he was annoying, probably.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I knew he had something I didn't have, so I started asking him. I thought I needed to be at that time. He was already part of the Vienna church.
Yeah.
And so I finally just said, look, Isaac, I'd like to go to your church. And I thought that was the solution. That's what I needed. Okay. I just needed to go to the right church. And so he directs me online to listen to some messages on the Godly Home by Denny Keniston.
Yeah.
And it's through that I really, for the first time, saw myself a wretched sinner going to hell. Even with all the good things that I was doing, it was just like, it was so crystal clear that if I died then, I'd be going to hell.
Very convicting.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is that I can't even think of, and I've gone back and I've listened to those same messages, and I can't even find what part of it was that caused that fear.
Yeah.
And all I know is I just fell on my knees in my workplace in my office, and I called on God, and he saved me, and I came home a completely different man.
Interesting.
Yeah, and that's where life began for us.
So I guess usually I try to get a little bit more of a childhood kind of upbringing and story like that. Were you born and raised in Mexico?
I was, yeah.
Yeah, Durango.
Yeah, Durango, Mexico.
Close to where Isaac now lives.
Yeah, very, very, very close. Yeah, and in the same area. Very young age, came here the first time. I think probably 4 years old.
Okay.
But then a lot of back and forth for a number of years until we finally settled in Canada.
So were you educated in Canada?
Yeah, I was. Yeah, from kindergarten till grade 9.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you must have been here pretty early.
Yeah, but there was, like I said, there were some times in between where we'd go back to Mexico for a while and then come back again.
Yeah.
And the last time that happened, I was in grade 8. And I was doing, like, I had straight A's in schools. The teachers had all these high expectations. I was the most polite guy in the world. But we went to Mexico, and I came back so far behind with my grades. I was just like, forget it. And I actually got involved a little bit with a skinhead gang in town, and all the wrong people, all the wrong things, and it just spiraled down.
Something
fast.
Probably about being so far behind and feeling overwhelmed by the thought of catching up is like, forget this, I'm going to do the opposite. Right?
Yeah, it was part of that, and I mean that age too is probably the most critical age too, where you're really trying to figure out what
you like 13, 14.
Yeah, right around there. Yeah. So it is the most challenging age, and then for the worst thing to happen, to be so good off and then come back so far behind.
Yeah.
It just really spiraled out of control fast.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I had 1 year, it was only grade 2, so I was just a little kid, 7 years old maybe, that I did really well. It was the first year in private school, and you had to get like 80s to pass. And I had all my grades in the 90s then, and I thought, man, this is going well. And then grade 3 we left and I went back to public school, and I had like C's and D's, and it was just like, who cares? It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And then I just wanted to make trouble, or just make everybody laugh, or just be the class clown or something. Right? Didn't get into a lot of like big trouble, but always something just causing turmoil. So when you were being good all the way through grade 8 and 9, what do you think was motivating you? You ever think about that?
Like before we went to Mexico?
Yeah.
I don't know. I think, well, there were some teachers in the school that were rooting for me the whole time because they knew I was an immigrant, and they saw how well I was doing. So they kept on giving me motivation, like, hey, you're going to become great and do great things, do amazing things. You're doing great. Keep it up. That praise, that did a lot.
Oh, it does so much.
Yeah.
Boys from young on want respect.
That's right. And then when that changed, the same teachers were literally sitting down with me and saying, what happened?
Who are you?
Yeah, like what's going on? Like they just couldn't believe the change.
Yeah.
Like it was like I brought hand pellet guns to public school and was shooting windows across the road, houses across the road from the school.
Man.
Like that's how bad it was.
Stuff that you'd probably be put in juvenile detention for.
Yeah, yeah. None of the huge, like, no drugs or anything like that, but that type of thing, right? And all of a sudden, people in town are coming to school, and why are my windows broken? They had no idea. I had it in my jacket, shot, put it back in my locker, and those types of things. And thankfully didn't stay that way.
One other thing that I often, for some reason, this question always keeps coming up when I'm talking to people, and I find it's a fun question to ask because we're raised Mennonite. What was your God consciousness like, or what was your religious kind of experience or thoughts early on? Do you ever think back and think, what did I think about God? Well,
I do, and there was never a question that there was a God and that he's to be feared.
It was like as obvious as daylight.
Absolutely. Like lightning, you fold your hands because have you been good enough? Is God going to strike you dead right here, right now? Right? So there was not a doubt in my mind that God existed, and would have professed to believe everything that they say about Jesus too, right?
Yeah.
But there's to be religious and be semi-good to actually being born again. Like there's that country song that goes, it's a thin line from a good man to one that knows he's been saved.
Okay.
But it's not actually a thin line. It's a huge...
It's a big gap.
Yeah, it's a big gap.
Because most people, and I think most Mennonites think this way from the ones I've had encounters with in my own upbringing, is that I'm really good. I'm really good. I'm almost good enough.
Yeah.
And you think if I could just do enough, then
Yeah.
I'd be okay.
That's right.
So then when you started getting into trouble and bringing the gun to school and all that kind of stuff, was there a lot of guilt then, or did you just, was your conscience kind of calloused?
Yeah, guilt towards God, none. I don't think at that point. I don't know if someone would have asked me if I still believed. I may have said yes, but the consciousness that I was doing anything wrong against God, it wasn't there. I hated the school system. I hated the teachers. I hated anyone in the positions of authority over me.
Your parents?
And well, no, I wouldn't. I think I may have seen them as not helpful. Maybe I wouldn't have hated or been outright rebellious against them. I probably would have struggled with the fact that they did bring us back and forth from Mexico. Like, this didn't help the situation, but I also didn't blame them for that either.
Okay.
It was just so common; everyone was doing it, and I think there was still, especially with my, there was still enough respect and honor that if they asked us to do something, we would do it. It would have never got to the point where I would have considered myself rebellious against my parents. No.
And you still go to church with them and all that?
Yeah, not as, yeah. I mean, here and there, they'd always be dragging us out of bed to get us to church.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
But your dad was always very involved too.
Well, yeah. Later in the years, it changed. Earlier in the years, I went because we had to. But yeah, he did. Later in the years, he became a Fiazinga. And I followed in his steps, and eventually was at 2.
I thought I remembered that.
Yeah, he was at he hacks the spot, and I was at the lowest one. And when it came time to me to quit that, then I sat down with him and explained to him all the reasons why, and he actually blessed it. He said, "You know what? Those are all good reasons for you to step down." And he said he would too, but it was hard for him because of peer pressure and whatnot. There was expectations.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But
one thing that around here, Mennonites got made fun of quite a bit in school system and stuff like that. But there's quite a few Mennonites and Mennonite churches around here. Was it probably even worse in Niagara? Because in Niagara there isn't that many like Dyche.
Oh yeah, it was horrible actually. First, yeah, I was actually called a dumb Mexican Mennonite.
Yeah, Mexican Mennonite was pretty common.
Yeah. And got wrestling fights with boys all the time because I was just that kid. But I think
the ones that came straight from Mexico, often they didn't clean up very well. They kind of smelled.
Yeah.
They wore ugly clothes.
Yeah, they were definitely not fashionable.
Yeah,
that's right. I mean, and I think for that part we were pretty good, but just in the beginning, not having the language down pat. But I think that things started changing because I started behind. I started like a year or two behind in school. And soon I was caught up, and then I was actually a year ahead.
Oh, nice.
So that I think proved that, okay, I'm not just, maybe there was that motivation though. I'm not going to be a dumb Mexican.
Right.
I'm gonna go. Yeah, it wasn't. They didn't call us a dumb Mexican Mennonite. They just called me a dumb Mexican because I was born in Mexico.
Yeah.
They probably didn't even know what a Mennonite was.
Interesting.
But yeah.
So then your teenage years were spent kind of in turmoil that way, or?
Yeah, they were, and again, they weren't horrible. I was just living the regular, go to the Uint and coming to Alma and hanging out, and not even parties that much. Usually just there'd be smaller clusters of guys that we'd hang out with. But I started dating Sarah, who I married at a pretty young age.
Okay.
And got married at a young age too, right? And so I'm thankful for that too, that I got out of it.
Spared from a lot.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I definitely never discourage younger marriages.
I mean, we both have brothers who waited till late 20s to get married. Maybe even, was Isaac even 30 almost?
No, he was
late 20s.
Yeah, late 20s, yeah.
And they ended up in a lot more trouble.
Yeah, absolutely.
And not that I'm a better person. I could have done all the same things, but I got settled down in a sense, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So I still count it as a blessing for sure.
Yeah.
Were you less than 20 at marriage?
19, yeah.
Yeah, same as me. Okay.
Yeah.
Right on. When we met, I believe you only had 4 children.
Yeah, we would have.
You got married at 19. You were Old Colony. You became a singer. Good, faithful Old Colony man. Then you had this experience after the Godly Home series. Yeah. And you already had 4 children at that point.
That's right. Yeah, we had 4 children and planned never to have any more.
Yeah.
And we actually had my wife's tubes tied and cut.
So a permanent plan.
Yeah, it was done. But when we got born again, and the reason for taking those measures was because both Sarah and I both looked at our family's histories, and we thought, we don't want to have all the trouble that big families have. Yeah. That's all we could remember is just trouble. And well, not that there's not all the time trouble, but we could see
there is a lot.
There is, yeah. But when we got saved, and especially earlier in the early days, meeting a lot of godly families that were larger families, then there was that desire that we'd like to have a godly family, but not just that, a large family. And so through the help of Norbert and Margaret Siegel family, they basically borrowed us the money to spend $7,000 to have my wife's tubes fixed. And we went in for an assessment, and they said, well, we can do it, but chances are it's not going to help any. And the initial doctor visit was actually pretty discouraging. He just looked at me and he said, oh, is this a new wife? And no. And oh, looked at her. This is the same one. You
have 4 kids.
Yeah, you two have the 4 kids, and you're the same. Yeah. So what's wrong with you? And the doctor started making fun of us.
Imagine.
And then we told him, I said, well, we want to do this because we feel like we took something in our hands that was left for God to do, and we want to just put it back as much as we can do ourselves and leave the rest to God. And he just said, no, you're wrong. Your wife's going to get pregnant. She's going to have a tubular pregnancy. She's going to die on the operating table, because he just assumed that we wouldn't take any medical measures then after that, right? Because we were just let things be the way that they are, right? And but we just trusted God through that whole process. And
interesting. That's hard for people to understand too, right? Because our culture, our society around us is pretty much limited to 1.5, 2 children per family. Yeah. And then even the Christian culture around us, it's kind of like even the Mennonites, 2, 3, 4 maybe. Mm-hmm. And so when we too had a large family, and we did it on purpose.
Yeah.
Some people think you're judging them constantly, like you all should have big families. Yeah. I never once thought others should all have big families.
Yeah.
To me, it was like a real conviction that, hey, God wants to bless us with children. And we didn't, there's some of the Duggars and stuff who just like every single possible child we can have, we're going to have, and end up with 19 kids. Yeah. We didn't feel like we were being legalistic about it at all. We were careful. We were, we brought the children in as it seemed appropriate. We used the wisdom of God had given us and the fruitfulness that God wanted to give us at the same time, and see if we could balance that out, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you ended up having 4 more.
That's
after
right.
That, pretty much 2 families.
Yeah, absolutely. It was just like, okay, Grace costed us $7,000, and then we had Bethany. Okay, now it's $3,500 a pop, and then we had Jason. Is like, oh, they're getting cheaper, because we had the $7,000. Right? It was joke with people. The more kids you have, the cheaper it gets. So.
That's right.
No, but we actually want to go back to the clinic that did the procedure, because at first when they did the operation, we weren't getting pregnant. And we went back, and he said only one side kept and the other side's not even intact. So the chance of pregnancy are
slim.
He said with a repair, they're already like 25% chance. But then now, since only one side is fixed, it's like 12.5% chance. Yeah. So he wanted to put us on all sorts of medication so that both sides would ovulate every month, because you can basically double your chances. And on the way home, my wife just naturally, at first, she was like, well, we're going to do it, right? Because we can get back up to 25% chance if we just take these drugs. And we thought about it and prayed about it, and both agreed, look, we've done everything we can now to take all sorts of drugs to make the body do something different than it's naturally supposed to do.
Kind of defeating the purpose,
So we just like, no, we're gonna put it back in God's hands. And literally 2 weeks later, she was pregnant.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and even when we announced it to our children that we weren't going to take, so we sat down with our children. They're old enough to understand.
How old was the youngest?
Well, Nancy would have probably been 9 years old at the time.
Wow.
So we explained to her that, no, you know what? Wait, she would have been 9. Linda would have been 9, because it would have been an 8-year gap from, that's right. Okay. So Nancy was the oldest, and so she heard us explain all these things about the drugs, and she's like, well, you're gonna do it, right? And then we're like, no, actually we're not. And then she started crying, because even the other siblings wanted more children in the house. But then like you said, 2 weeks later she's pregnant, and then just one after another. Like we probably could have kept going if we wanted to.
Yeah.
So, but we just let it go back to natural, right?
I often think back to that Godly Home series. For me, it was pretty instrumental in those regards, right? When we got married, I decided, Lisa and I both decided we're going to have two. And that's it. That way we can pay for their education and, you know, all that kind of modern thinking, right?
Yeah.
And then I think it was some influence from probably the No Greater Joy stuff, but largely to that Godly Home series.
Mm-hmm.
And I look back on some of the stuff that was taught there, and I actually don't even agree with a lot of what was taught.
Yeah.
But his passion and his drive that he expressed towards raising your children and being intentional and being involved and being a father that's actually around your kids, it has affected me to this day, where I have purposely tried for the last 12 to 15 years to work from home. Not everybody can work from home, but I'm around my kids a lot, and I feel like it's paid off, but we'll see, right?
Yeah, no, we feel the same way.
Yeah. So I want to go back briefly yet to the time when you said before that you fell on your knees before God in your office or at work, wherever it was. I know now that you know the gospel well. You know Christ and imputed righteousness and all that stuff. I've heard you express it very clearly. So I know you know that now.
Yeah.
How much of that did you see when you first got saved?
Very little.
Yeah.
Like honestly, the thinking back, the main thing that stood out to me was after these messages that he preached, they sang this song, Just As I Am, without one plea. That's really just coming to God honestly as I am, desperately desiring him to save me. It would only be years later, probably maybe at the most a year and a half later, where it started being explained to me about imputed righteousness, about me now God seeing the righteousness of Christ on me and Jesus having taken my sin on him, where those things became so real that there was even at one point where I was like, wow, like, did I just get saved?
Did I get saved again? Yeah.
You know, like a higher level of understanding. I don't doubt that I got saved that day. Even like I was a singer in the old colony, and when I went the next Sunday to church to sing, I opened up the Yazampiuk and I started reading, and I could understand it. I couldn't understand it before. I was literally looking at this song and reading it verse by verse, and I thought this must be a new song somehow added, and pointing it to other people in the song group saying,
have you ever read that?
Was this song always in here? Do you know what this says? And, you know, songs that talk about assurance of salvation too.
Absolutely.
You know, and then he's, oh yeah, of course, we sing it all the time type of thing, right? So my eyes were so clearly opened, and I was always a really grumpy man, very bitter, and that completely changed.
Okay.
In fact, growing up, my parents gave us the 1 year all Sesame Street puzzles, and they gave Isaac Big Bird, he was the tallest. They gave my brother Peter Ernie because he was small, and they gave me Oscar the Grouch.
Because you were grouchy.
Yeah. So it was just the way I was. And
I can't imagine.
Yeah, cats, like animals around the property, I cared nothing for them. I'd come home from work grumpy, and if there's a cat in my way, they'd get the boot. Like I didn't care how I got them off the sidewalk, they're gone. On the day I got saved, I came home and I was like, wow, look at that amazing, beautiful cat. And I reached down to pet the cat, and the cat turned around and it just sort of jumped because it was expecting me to whack. And I was like, why is it running away from me? Like there was an obvious gentleness that came in that was not there before.
Well, even just that song, Just As I Am Without One Plea, that's one thing, but then it goes on to say, but that thy blood was shed for me. So once you start thinking about that song and recognizing the lyrics, like I knew that song growing up, even at Old Colony, but when you start to actually let yourself into it, what's he saying? I'm coming to God and I have nothing to offer,
that's right,
but that the blood of Jesus was shed for me. And so if you can sing that out of assurance and joy coming before God, there's salvation there.
Absolutely.
Right?
Well, and actually during this whole time, for the year, probably a whole year before I got saved, I was teaching Bible study at work.
Okay. So
every Thursday lunchtime we had Bible study, and when I got born again, it became alive. Like I literally came that next Thursday, and there was probably about 8 or 9 people in our Bible study group. And I was like, guys, I got saved a couple days ago. And I started preaching with authority, not just like, like doing a systematic teaching. And there was so much passion there that our Bible study group went from 9 down to 4.
Oh.
Like, yeah,
Too pushy.
Yeah, it was like, we weren't going to be
better now. What's the problem?
Yeah, I couldn't understand it. You know, like now, not just a small group heard it, like the whole area. Like I was preaching with authority now. And
a lot of us back then, I think, probably had we had some guidance and some good teaching on being tactful, on winning people with wisdom. You know, we could have done a lot better. But I know at North Star too, when people got saved and they got real passionate, all of a sudden they're carrying their Bibles with them. They put them on the break table, and everybody's like, "Oh, here goes again!" Right? These guys. Yeah. And now knowing that, hey, if you want to win somebody, you got to be winsome. You got to actually care for the people and stuff like that. So.
Yeah, but I had been wanting to get right with God for a long time already, even before. There was probably about 2 years before I got saved. A friend, a coworker, one of the Bible study guys at work, invited me to a special. No, it wasn't a special invitation. There was a snowstorm, and so the Old Colony preacher that was supposed to come, he couldn't come, and so church was canceled. So I went to a Pentecostal church that Sunday morning.
That's quite a flip.
Oh yeah, like I mean, well, my friend from work, he went to that church. He was involved in there. It's like, I've always wanted to go there. Hey, now I can't go to church anyway, so I went. Okay. And they had a really good, strong gospel message. And afterwards they sang that "Just As I Am Without One Plea" song with an invitation. And I desperately wanted to come forward. I didn't. And literally that next week, I felt so guilty. I reached out to my friend at work and I said, I really needed to go. I felt like I needed to respond to the gospel. Unfortunately, he couldn't grasp the thought that all these years we've been teaching Bible study together, and now all of a sudden you're not saved. So he's like, "No, Frank, you know, you're saved. Like, don't worry about it." And then literally 2 years later. 2 years. Yeah, it was quite some time. Yeah.
How old were you when you got saved then?
I probably would have been. It would have been 2005. So we'd have to do the math.
What year were you born?
1977.
77. Okay, so you're 5 years older than me.
So that would be 37 plus, but
mid-20s, mid to late 20s.
Yeah.
Interesting. And so then that's when, after you got saved and you had the whole reversal and everything. Oh no, it was before that already that the whole church at Niagara kind of was born, right?
Before what?
Before you had your wife's reversal.
That's right. That's right. The church had been going for probably 2 years already when we finally decided to do that. And
it went from us meeting in your basement there the first few times probably to eventually somebody teaching regularly, right?
Yeah, that's right. Isaac and Lisa moved down. So that right after they got married, shortly after they got married, they moved down. And then we moved the church into their basement for a while. They had a better spot and made sense. So then when Corny and Tina got involved, then the church moved into their house for a time until we eventually started renting a space in a jam factory. Actually, well, it was a pig barn that was gutted and converted into a jam factory. And then we were renting that for a while, and then the landowner at some point says, "I've been thinking about renovating another one. If you guys want to do the work, you can have that one full time as your church, as your church building." So we literally gutted and renovated another pig barn and made it into a lamb barn.
There you go.
Yeah. So
I remember coming there once too to do a couples night. I didn't share. I was helping serve or something along those lines. But anyway, there's a lot that we could talk about there, I'm sure. But you went on to eventually kind of teach and lead there, one of the elders from early on, right?
Yeah, fairly early. I think I was I think it was 2009, if I remember correctly, where I was actually ordained as one of the leaders there. Yeah. And that went on for, it was about 8 years, if I remember correctly, where we were in leadership there. And then we sensed God starting to call us as a family to reach people from non-Mennonite backgrounds. My son, he had a passion for the saving the unborn, for the abortion. He became a bit of an abortion activist, and my one daughter, she wanted to go to Greece and help with the refugee crisis there, and was working with human trafficked peoples. My other daughter also had a heart for human trafficked women, and my wife, she was begging me to start can we just bring soup to the homeless in the cities? All the people that we were inviting to church were all from non-Mennonite backgrounds. They all somehow, we met them and made friendships and started inviting folks out to church. But unfortunately, with that came some people that had divorce and remarriage in their past, and were trying to, work through
major cultural differences.
Oh yeah, big time. And whereas church at Niagara, the main ministry was towards the Old Colony Mennonite background people. Yeah. And so this started becoming a conflict. How are we going to be able to reach opposite ends of the spectrum, right? And so it started getting difficult, where some felt like Corny and I were just pulling in complete opposite directions, but I think we just had two different ministry peoples in mind. Yeah. And so we eventually, it got difficult, and before it became a church split, we just decided to step down, and then we eventually stepped out of there completely. Yeah. And then we started actually a new mission right in the town of Welland. We rented a space, and we started just reaching out to the homeless, doing what we wanted to do all these years anyway, right? But then COVID came, and literally landlords were telling us that either we had to start wearing masks and start social distancing, or they're going to give us the boot. But meanwhile, we're walking on the streets and inviting homeless in. And, the one fella, I started talking to him, praying for him on the streets there. And he just, afterwards, he said, no one's ever done this for me in my life. And he grabbed me and held me and was weeping on my shoulder. I'm supposed to now just
stay back.
There's not a chance, right?
Interesting.
Yeah. And all the homeless shelters had all shut down due to COVID, except for one Catholic church building had unofficially left the one back door open. And so this broke our hearts too, to think that that these folks have no place to go. But then, because of all the restrictions, we eventually had to shut that down. We just couldn't operate anymore.
I remember at that time you talking to me a little bit about whether or not maybe we could help with a bit of a church plant and get something going there, and even meet in that building that you guys had rented and stuff. And did you ever end up having church services there?
We did not. I think we had 3 services. We had midweek Bible study and Friday night cafe. We had regularly for a while already. We had 2 or 3 Sunday morning services already in that church building.
And people were coming?
From the streets, yes. Yeah, from that little area. We had a couple of folks from church background that did come and visit, and there's financial support from quite a few of those. Some of those that donated items to the cafe to help with that. So there was support in the background. But when we reached out to church support, I mean, you guys, all the churches were dealing with COVID problem too. Right?
It was pretty chaotic.
Yeah, and pastors from other churches had later on apologized that they weren't able to get more involved right away. But I don't hold anything to anyone, because everyone was trying to figure out how to just survive.
Yeah, it was a weird time.
Yeah.
Did you know almost immediately? Like I think about you and your character and your brother Isaac in particular. Those are the guys I know best from your family, and then obviously we know Eva quite well. Yeah. But all of you guys are pretty capable communicators and love to talk, and I've heard your family gatherings are loud. Everybody's, Yeah. And so did you know immediately that you wanted to teach and share, or was it, there was an automatic, obvious transformation when you got saved? Yeah,
I actually knew I was going to be a preacher when I was like 8 years old.
Okay.
For some reason, I looked up to Reverend Olson from Little House on the Prairie, or Alden.
Okay.
Yeah, I told I think I may even told my mom that one day I want to be a preacher like that guy. And now, every now and then we watch the series, and I can't think of what I liked about the guy. Yeah. I was like, man, preach it, And so I always knew for some reason. And even when I was in the Old Colony as a Sunday school teacher, I was the first one to stop just reciting, memorized prayers, but actually praying out loud. And I was the first one to say, I don't want to use this curriculum. I just want to preach out of the Bible. So yeah, there was a lot of that there where I just knew that God had something in mind. So
then from Sunday school teacher to Zinnia and stuff, you were well on your way to eventually being a preacher, probably.
Yeah, that's right. But one thing that always bothered me was that there was this mindset where if you want to be, you shouldn't be.
Probably shouldn't be, yeah.
And because you're proud, right?
Yeah.
And then it was only those that don't want to. That's why they're weeping and wailing, because
Exactly.
they're the humble, you know.
Yeah. There's a weird contradiction there, right? Because in the nominal Christianity type thing, you'll get like 17, 18-year-old boys that, you know, decide, I'm going to be a preacher as a vocation. I'm going to go to Bible school. I'm going to get an education. Then I'm going to go and put out applications. And that seems all weird and wrong to me too. Like if God's not particularly calling you, the education is great if you get a good biblical education.
Yeah.
But when I read that passage, you know, he that desires the office of a bishop desires a good work. And I thought, hey, you know what? I actually have this longing, this yearning to share, to preach, to teach, to educate people from the things that are in me are burning, right? I want to share them.
Yeah, absolutely. And like with us, when I got born again and I realized how many biblical things we weren't doing and how many things we were doing that weren't biblical, I made a vow to my family that I was never going to put expectations on them that weren't biblical. That we were going to study the Bible for ourselves, because we had been disappointed, right? Like it almost felt like we'd been lied to all these years.
Yeah.
And so I think that commitment was a lot of the drive that caused me to open the Bible and to look for Bibles that had no commentaries and no extras. I just wanted to know finally what the Bible says for itself. And then as that led to, obviously, first naturally teaching my family, like there was almost like fire and brimstone messages in our home almost every night. Like I was really, really passionate to reach, not that I was even thinking of, I need to get my kids, you know, my children born again, but just I wanted to share the amazing gospel message with them. And so that fire never died down. And even over the years when situations arose that disappointed us, there was never once this thought that it was God's fault, and never a temptation.
Did all this for you, God.
Yeah, and never a temptation to, like, you know, some people say, you know, I've been disappointed with the church, and then that's why I went out, you know, backwards for so long, and that didn't happen with us.
Okay.
My wife and I during our first trial, we sat down and we talked about it, and I just shared my heart that we can let any of these situations drive us away from God, or we can allow it to bring us closer. And so we made that commitment that if there's a difficulty, then there's some way that we can draw closer to God in this.
Yeah.
And
it's tricky though when you look at the situation and the difficulty, and you know that part of it was your own selfishness and your own arrogance or whatever, and it's like, man, this shouldn't have happened this way. It didn't need to happen this way.
That's right. Yeah. There's definitely things that I should have done differently. Like
I wasn't even necessarily thinking about
no, I'm thinking about myself
here
like
too.
Like when I was in eldership there at the church at Niagara, one thing that when I started having, because my children were the first ones to hit the teenage years, so we started, you know, dealing with some of these struggles that a lot of the other,
what can they do, what can't they do, what's allowed, what's not allowed.
That's right. Why do we do it? Why, you know, and should they remain in a bubble, do we not, and all these things. And so we just every time we started having some of these difficulties, we would just sort of seclude ourselves a little bit. We wouldn't all of a sudden show up at Bible study because we were working through something. And I think this could have been interpreted as being secretive. I wasn't being as transparent with the church with some of the things we were going through, and part of that was
how do you explain it all?
Well, yeah, and part of that too was to honor my child, because I don't want this coming back to them saying, why did you talk to, you know, 6 people about this thing that. So there was that wanting to honor this thing that my child's going through, and then when Corey and I were starting to go obviously in different directions, a few of the brothers had pulled me aside and suggested that I, you know, step down from preaching, teaching for a while, just to focus on building relationships in the church. Like they thought that if people are having an issue with me and misunderstanding things, it's obviously because they don't know me enough. So maybe take some time to build relationships. Well, I thought, like, no, that's preaching the word of God is preaching the word of God, and I'm being faithful with that. And I would, you know, give back the challenge, like, where have I been unfaithful in preaching the true word of God, right? And so I continued to move forward, expecting that they're gonna the scripture where it says love covers a multitude of sins, I thought, at some point they're going to overlook some of these small things. And it could have been over time that they would have. But I probably should have just now in hindsight, just like, you know what, it's probably wisdom.
Step aside.
Yeah, step aside, just let them see my heart and that we truly do love God.
The funny thing is, like I heard today on a secular podcast, I think it was, where the guy was saying that when you start a new job or new career or a new position, you don't know what you're doing, and so you think about all of us, especially if we got into church leadership kind of young, 25, 30, 35 years old. You think, I'm just passionate, I'm excited. But do you know how to talk to people? Do you know how to handle things?
That's right.
It gets tricky for sure. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was hoping, there's so many things we could talk about. I was kind of thinking about some of your kids and some of the, challenges that you've seen and gone through, and, how you still seem to have their respect and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But we could probably talk about that for a half hour, but I was really hoping to get on to your kind of like your main ministry that you've been doing now
the Tabernacle.
For the last number of years. Yeah.
Yeah, the Tabernacle ministry. So we had, I think through even Vienna, we found out about Bruce Woodford, because you guys would have had them.
The first time I ever saw Bruce Woodford might have been a video, but I think it was a presentation at the Vienna church.
Yeah.
And then we had it at Springfield once or twice.
Okay.
And then...
and so at some point in there, we had him in the early days come to Niagara as well.
Okay.
So he had the presentation set up in that renovated pig barn. And that was the first time I really grew to appreciate how the gospel of Jesus was portrayed already in so many different ways throughout the whole Old Testament, and especially in the tabernacle model. And the second time we invited Bruce up to come was actually during tent meetings. Part of those tent meetings, we had the tabernacle teachings, again, a shorter version of it, but it was still really good. And then at those meetings, I asked Bruce, because he wasn't a young man at that time, what his plan was, like who he is going to pass the mantle over after him. Mm-hmm. And he says, well, he kind of just in passing says, well, maybe you. And I didn't even think along those lines at all. I thought I was expecting him to talk about one of it, because I know that one of his sons in Mexico does it sometimes as well. And so I was hoping he'd say, oh yeah, Tim or whoever, right, would take it over.
Keep doing it.
That's right. And then we did keep in touch over the years, just here and there, as I was starting to have some of these struggles in my family. I didn't just, I wasn't satisfied with talking to other young men that had children younger than I. I reached out to older men that had gone through all this, and he was one of the men that I called. Okay. And I said, one of the times it was a conversation about exactly that. It's like, do I just take the my way or the highway route, or do I just plead with them and teach them, but ultimately let them decide for themselves? And that was obviously naturally the advice that he gave, was to continually to teach and instruct, but allow free will to take its course. Yeah. And so, because of keeping in communication with him, then over the next few years, he called me the one day and said, Frank, I've got 2 weeks to live. You've got to come out and see me. I'd like to talk to you one last time. And he had terminal cancer. Yeah. He had done some natural treatments that seemed to be going nowhere. So he knew he was going to die. And so literally 2 days later, I'm there at their house, and he's just skin and bones, but he's smiling from ear to ear, just like you remember him. Like he is the happiest man. Oh, welcome. Thank you for coming, Frank. And he went probably for 2 hours teaching me again. Like I thought I was going to come there to try to lift his spirits, and it was the other way around. He was just... What
a testimony.
Yeah, absolutely. And he had during the last few weeks was burdened about the cost of his own funeral. So he had done all of his research to figure out how to...
I actually went to a presentation of his where he was teaching on how to do funerals cheaper.
Yeah, that was all because he was preparing for his own. He didn't want to leave any financial burden on his family, and so he decided on cremation. And one of the things he found out was that for that, all you need is a cardboard box for the crematorium. So he's like, do you want to see the box? And it's like, yeah, I guess so. And he's like, it's leaning right there against the wall. And he's like, oh, okay. So he goes and takes the lid off and stands inside the box facing me, smiling from ear to ear. What do you think? Pretty good fit, eh? And I just couldn't believe it. Like the scripture, "Oh death, where is thy sting?" that came to mind. Like to him, it was nothing, and so he pre-recorded another gospel message to be played at his funeral. He built a wooden box to put the cardboard box temporarily in with dry ice or whatever, right? And with gospel, with Bible verses all on every side of it. And he just wanted to, and he believed that his last gospel message would in fact be his resurrection. So he preached it on video, but he says that when I'll be resurrected from the grave, that's going to be the last testimony to the unbelieving world that Jesus Christ is resurrected from the dead. Amen. So just really encouraging. In that meeting, he said, now we need to talk about the tabernacle. And I didn't even think of it on my way there, that might be happening. But then he's like, you need to take everything I have, the model, all the books I have, if you want to take on that ministry. And I was just overwhelmed. It was an instant yes.
Right away you knew.
Oh yeah, I just knew right away that I found it so valuable over the years that to think that of this ministry not continuing just wasn't an option. But we were at that time, so I took the model home, and it was shortly after that we moved to Alberta, and
packed it all with you?
Packed it all with us, moved it over there with the moving truck. And his model was extremely heavy. Like it must have weighed like close to 400 pounds. I never actually weighed it, but you needed two good, strong men to move that thing around. And all solid wood and particle board, it was made in the 60s.
Okay.
And it was built to last.
He traveled that thing all over the place for years.
Yeah, he had rigs and everything that he made that he could use to a pulley system to put it up on top of his station wagon to get around. And we still have a bunch of those photos. And so we brought everything over there, and Richard Peters, a good friend of mine, one day we were out hunting, and he says, "Hey, you remember Bruce Woodford? I think we should maybe show the DVD that we have of his tabernacle teaching at the church that we were attending." And I was like, "Oh, you want to do one better? How about we use his model?" He's like, "What?" And he didn't even know I had it, right?
No idea.
No idea. I was like, "Yeah, it's in my basement."
And
actually.
You weren't doing anything with it yet?
We had not yet. No, I had read a lot of the books because he gave me just piles of books. I couldn't believe how
there's a lot of work that's been done on that topic.
Oh yeah, old work though.
Like, to me, what it really does for me is validates the scriptures enormously, right? You look at what Christ has done. You're excited about his work, his death, burial, resurrection, the cross, going outside of the city, and the bloodshed, all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And then you read the book of Leviticus, and it's kind of boring and drab. And you don't really know what it's all about. Yeah. And then you see not only somebody, but tons of people have written large volumes on the connections between Christ. Yeah. He was fulfilling that whole system in one go, right? Yeah. And then he went into the true tabernacle in heaven, the not made with hands, right? Yeah. Like there's so much beauty in that thing. But then it's also like, there's no way Christ could have just come and said, you know what, I'm going to live my life and die my death, and then I'll plan it all out so that it happens just like that. No, this was pre-planned.
That's right.
Thousands of years before the foundations of the world, how Christ would die. And then God gave the revelation, this is how I want you to build a tabernacle, because I've got a plan coming.
That's right.
And he started revealing this truth of what Christ would do, right?
Yeah, exactly. The verse in Hebrews where it says that the tabernacle, God said to make it exactly the way he said it. So he gave Moses instructions. And later on, he said, now make it exactly the way I told you to make it, because it's a representation of the heavenly one.
The true tabernacle.
Yeah, and I was just like, what? Like a heavenly... Then there was something in me that was like, there's lots more here than what I ever thought. And, the one door, and then the animal offering, and then the basin, the candles, the candlelight. Jesus is the only...
The color of the curtain.
That's right. The purple royalty, and the blood death, and then the white righteousness, and right, all the symbolism, the outside wall, the copper base showing, the brass base showing judgment. You're judged unless you're white, and the only way you can be made white is through the silver tops, money or a price paid for your salvation, right? There's so many different, and the more you look into it, the more you see all the time. And so we did the first teaching there at the Burnt River Bible Camp for the church that Richard Peters is attending, and that's when we realized that there was so many comments from that, good feedback that we decided that let's take this more seriously and actually make this a family ministry. But to do it as a family ministry and travel around with this 400-pound tabernacle model, it seemed impractical. So we sat down as a family and was like, well, how about we make a new one ourselves? And so I bought a 3D printer and I started doing some of the plastic components. My wife's sewing and the kids are painting, and so as a family we built a new model.
How many pounds is this one?
30. Yeah, it literally I can barely get it in as a checked bag at the airport.
Wow.
Yeah, the box was like, it's virtually maybe like an inch oversized. So if they took a tape measure to it, they'd be like, no. But it was able to fit through the scanner. And the first time I took it to Ontario, or the only time it actually came to Ontario, then they went through the scanner. But because there's LED lights and wiring involved, I left the batteries in there initially as well. So it went through the scanner and they just see wires and batteries.
Is this a bomb?
Exactly, right? So they're like, it's a black box. It says fragile all over it, right? It's not like pink and, friendly to the eye. And so they're just like, well, we're going to have to open this up. And that was another huge opportunity, because as I was starting to open it up, I realized that I had put everything in upside down, where to get down to the wires and the batteries, it was actually all the way in the bottom.
Okay.
So as I was starting to open that up and unpack it, I was telling the guy at the airport, this represents Jesus, the way he died for me, his blood, and that may have helped the situation, because we were only halfway through, and then he's like, okay, no, it's good enough, just pack it up. And because I wanted him to really believe me that this was a ministry tool, right? And I didn't want to have to right there. I would have missed the plane. And so I brought it to Ontario and did a few teachings down here, and then in Alberta, twice there at a Christian school, at the one church, Christian school, and then another church. Yeah. And there's opportunities this summer again, so we're just settling.
You were talking about putting a video together. Did that ever get?
No, not yet.
I was really hoping to share with this as well.
I will, and I'll probably end up doing that at the next class. Mm-hmm. Put a nicer video together, but even the little bit of videos that I have and photos, they don't do it justice.
No, that's true.
Like, it's, if anyone wants to see it, like, it's a 4x8 model. It's easy to set up, and we're looking forward to that being a bit of a family ministry, where we can continually travel over Canada and maybe to the U.S.
It's like evangelism and Bible teaching and what's those illustrations called, where you have like an actual substance thing? I can't think of the term now, but it's like all that in one, right? Yeah,
that's right. It does help. And we have, like, up in Alberta, northern Alberta, there's a lot of ministries naturally to the Indians up there, right? To the natives that are living there. And they're a people group that probably appreciate symbolism a lot more. Right? So I'm thinking that might be a good opportunity to get it up there, because they might appreciate that too. We as Mennonites, we believe the Old Testament. So bringing it to churches from our backgrounds, it's very effective, because we already believe the Old Testament.
We know the tabernacle was a thing.
That's right.
When I first got saved, somebody prayed a prayer. I was probably in that charity movement, where as he was praying, he said, "Father, I approach your throne on the ground of the shed blood of the Lord Jesus Christ." And it put a visual in my mind that has never gone away, where I recognize, like the Bible says, to come before him boldly, knowing we have access. But we have access through a great cost, right? The only way we can access his throne, we can do it boldly, but the only way is on the ground of the shed blood of Jesus. So that veil that's opened, and we can now access, and not just the outer court, but we can go into the very most holy place. Exactly. And that little tabernacle on earth, the one that you have a model of, I think when we get to heaven, we'll see the glorious reality of it. And if yours is 4x8, what will that one be? Like football fields? Just massive, who knows? Yeah, well, Solomon, high and lifted up. Wasn't Solomon that made the temple, like, everything seven times as many, and the 7 lamps instead of 1, because he just wanted to magnify it all. And if heaven's going to be magnified even more, I mean, I tend to think that heaven, there'll probably be only one, because I think the lampstand being one shows us there's only one way, right? But one light source. But
yeah, it'll be glorious.
That's awesome.
Glorious day.
So if somebody's listening and they've got a church group and they'd love to have a presentation like that, how do they get a hold of you? Do you have social media? Or?
Well, we have social media. I do have a website that I use for ministry. It's called whyouneedjesus.org.
Whyouneedjesus.org.
Yeah, and I do have it. I don't have anything on there yet for the Tabernacle ministry, but I will. I'm planning.
They can contact you through.
They can contact me through that website. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So now we didn't really cover the idea of Alberta. You kind of threw it in there.
Yeah.
You were here working along, and you had this desire to see a church planted in Niagara. So
That's right.
Another thing I'd love to kind of touch on a little bit.
Yeah.
You moved to Alberta, and you still got a church planted in Niagara without your participation somehow.
Well,
I wouldn't say you, but you had a large part to do with it.
Well, there was, because over the years, as shortly after we left the church at Niagara, we always knew that there's like a dozen families here that are just kind of desiring.
They want zealous, real Christianity,
That's right.
But they don't quite want that.
Yeah.
So we need to have another option.
That's right. And we were in talks. So we did meet for a while. Some of us, we were gathered back together again and talking about, what church we would reach out to if we wanted to actually get something going in Niagara. At that time when we were living here, there wasn't clear consensus as to which denomination we should reach out to. Some were saying, the Mennonite Yamande. Others were saying Gospel Light. I was asking for Gospel Lighthouse and for Springfield to come down, and there was some other churches in the mix there, and so there wasn't anything clear, and so nothing happened. And but then when we moved back, and we came back for my dad's funeral, I sat down with Pastor Herman Buchert and Pierre Clausen, and they brought up the subject. Is there still opportunity in Niagara? And I said, yeah, absolutely there was. And then when we came back and to do the Tabernacle teaching, I did it at the Gospel Lighthouse Christian School. Then we talked again briefly. I went out for coffee with Pastor Herman Buchert, and he brought it up again. Apologized that back then they didn't, but again, I don't blame anyone.
It was the
right?
whole COVID thing, yeah.
And so then he asked again if I thought there still would be families. It was easy for me to say, oh yeah, absolutely. But then
you hadn't really been there.
That's right. But then when I got back to Alberta, I thought, well, how can I be so sure, right? I've never actually talked to all these different folks, these families, to see if they actually would go ahead and be for it, right? So I picked up the phone and I started calling, and all of these we had relationships with, right?
Yeah.
If Gospel Lighthouse churches would you guys be interested in listening to them? That's all I did is call them. Then I had a list, all the families that I had on a list, they all said yes. There was maybe one or two that never responded. But then I was able to say, you know what, there's these 10 families that you can meet with right away. And
yeah, we knew several of them, obviously, right? Through Poncho and through John Gunther and through your sister Eva. We knew that there was a stirring there and that there really was a desire for stuff. So now it's been going for a year or more?
Yeah, it's a bit over a year now, and going well.
70, 80 people I've heard.
Yeah, something, yeah. And I keep in touch with some of the leadership just because we're really passionate. Would have loved to see that happen back then, right?
Yeah.
And so we just want to see it continue now, hoping that it does. And so hoping to visit there this Sunday morning, actually, and get in touch with all those folks again. And then when we moved to Alberta, there was at one point I had a meeting with head of church planting for the EMMC in Alberta.
Okay.
And shared our story with him, and then he actually offered a position in the church to be church planting for the EMC churches over there in Alberta. But at the time it was a bit of us really, I don't know. We don't know the EMC churches that well, and talked to my wife about it, and we didn't really have any clarity on that. And then this happened. It's the first one started in our basement, and then this one started, and now recently and then we started that ministry in Welland, which unfortunately got shut down by COVID. But now more recently, my wife and I have been burdened for this little town. It's only 15 minutes from our house. There's this little village called Woking, and it's a run-down little town, no church. And so our hope is to now go door to door and just knock on doors and inviting folks to pray, to see what's going on and how we can pray for them, and with the hope of inviting people out to a Bible study class in our home. So that's now what we're going to be doing there locally. And we're also attending would be a Burke-Taller Mennonite church in our area. So it would be a larger church of about 300 people, and very, very good church, like a good solid teaching, people that love the Lord. The gospel is very clear. They're now starting to get really involved in different missions. They started a billboard gospel ministry. So a few guys from the church, and talking to other people, they were able to rally together fundraising to start this, basically putting up huge, like 14 by 30 billboards with the gospel on there. And so I'm on the board of directors for that, and helping getting that going. I actually did the graphic work for the two first signs that are going up soon. And then the pastor of the church also invited me to sit on the board for Crossroads Radio Ministry. So Crossroads Radio is a radio it's a CIM. CIM radio is out of Edmonton, and they rebroadcast their radio, Christian radio, all over Canada actually. And Crossroads would be the Grand Prairie one. So I sit on the board with that, trying to figure out how I fit in with that ministry, and then
interesting.
Yeah.
I guess one other thing that I've been curious about is why did you suddenly move to Alberta?
Well, we as far as church goes in Niagara,
things weren't really happening.
That's right. There wasn't anything happening there, so we felt as a family we need to move somewhere, and it was the right opportunity to sell, and so we did get a really good offer on our house. And as we started looking around for what to buy, then those options just weren't there.
Then the deal doesn't seem so good after all.
That's right. And then I think through COVID, because of COVID and the experience that we had with that mission work being shut down, we had a bit of a anti-Ontario feeling. It was just like, well, if we're going to move, what point is there in moving to Elmer? Because Ontario is the problem, right? And looking back now, that may have, like, you can't run away from
Alberta had their issues.
Exactly,
their leader kind of backpedaled and
big time
different takes on things.
That's right. Well, in the beginning, we looked at the leadership in Alberta and we thought, this is where to go. And so we had already our sights set on there, and then the leader just flip-flopped because he was caught having a dinner on top of a building with no restrictions, no masks or anything. So they're like, oh, you hypocrite, and then the whole province turned on him. So we started looking at, well, if we moved anywhere else in Canada, we didn't feel like we wanted to move out of Canada. We wanted to keep Canadian citizenship.
It's easier to stay in Canada,
And Alberta made sense. And then we looked at, well, we're Alberta. Then I had one cousin in the Grand Prairie area, and then Richard Peters I knew, Peter Zacharias, I knew him too. And so we knew some folks that had moved from Ontario, even from Niagara to Grand Prairie. So there was enough.
You immediately had a handful of people you could connect with.
There were some, and then when we went out there to visit, then we could see ourselves living there, and started looking for houses and found the one that we liked, and then all made sense. It's still difficult at times because we do have...
Your oldest four are still here?
Oldest three are here. Oldest three are here, and now 4 grandkids.
Yeah.
So that's hard, especially for Sarah. Like it's hard for me too, but especially Sarah. She's always been such have a mom's heart, right? And now she's got that grandma heart. Like she just wants to hold her grandbabies and be there. And so thankfully I still work for a company out of Ontario, so I do come back often enough on company trips that I can still keep in touch.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, let's spend about an hour, and maybe we could just keep going, because I know there's a few other things. Like just last weekend, I preached at what is called a Revive and Thrive.
Oh yeah, that's right.
It was a couples thing.
Yeah.
That also would have been at least partially spearheaded by you.
Yeah. A group of us got
Men's Encounter, Women's Encounter.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there was a bunch of guys that had gone to Men's Encounter that were kind of down and out through COVID. There was a lot of churches that weren't really doing social events anymore, and so a group of us met and we started talking. Well, what can we do for these guys that are feeling discouraged and needing another uplift, right? And so George Giesbrecht says, I got a space. Like we just had our daughter's wedding planned at Jake Fair's shop, and maybe I could talk to Jake Fair about doing something. It was a very quick last minute thing, and definitely, because of the nature of the situation, we call it revive, but it's not just get revived. You got to start thriving, right?
Yeah, because the men's encounter, women's encounter often would revive people, get them really excited, and then they would just kind of fall through the cracks.
Exactly.
Didn't get solid teaching.
That's right, and that was one thing that we decided that if we're going to do this, we need local churches involved. So we decided that we wanted to have the teaching be done by local pastors, teachers, so that if there's someone that's been to a men's encounter and they're looking for a better church option, that we're introducing them in a way to local churches. And so that's what we endeavored to do, and encourage the guys to keep going with them. When we moved to Alberta, the first couple, I was still involved from Alberta, helping with the registrations, kind of like the tech background of it. But they took over so quickly and just kept running with it. And I didn't even know until recently that they had another one planned.
Yeah, I don't know if this was the first couples one or if they'd done couples.
No, they had done couples one before. Yeah, we always did couples, men's, women's, then back around again.
Interesting.
There was talk about doing one for the youth too, but I don't think that ever happened yet. But
there was probably, I think they said 35 couples signed up. I don't think they all showed up, but I would say 30, around 30 or more.
Oh, good. Yeah.
So it was nice
and all sorts of different backgrounds, right?
Well, I was surprised. Like I recently preached in Mexico in January, February, and I went to a church there that's a little more progressive, I guess. They don't seem as Dyck, and so this group seemed more Dyck than Mexico.
Oh,
right? A lot of them came out of Old Colony, and we sat with a couple, really nice couple. They're not Old Colony; they haven't been for years, but they're like in their 70s, and there was another couple there that was almost 80 years old and just really excited about the Lord, and it was kind of neat. They were really passionate about the truth, and
yeah, that's good. Yeah, hopefully those guys can keep that going. Hope to have coffee with George and maybe a couple others while I'm down here.
Good stuff.
Yeah,
right on. Well, I appreciate your time and
Thanks,
sharing your story. Anything else that you'd wanted to kind of touch on?
Well, no, just I guess emphasize back on if there's folks that are going through difficult times, just to hold on to God and draw closer to Him, not further away. There's no reason to back down and give up.
Amen. That's good stuff.
All right.
Thanks, Frank.
Thanks.